We are just days away from former VP Biden announcing his running mate. Several top Democrats tell me former Ambassador Susan Rice, Senator Kamala Harris, and Representative Karen Bass are still in the hunt, but they say VP Biden is saying little even to friends about the decision. The eventual pick, however, won't get that big arena crowd to welcome them. The Democratic convention is, as we discussed, going virtual, and Mr. Biden will now accept the nomination from Delaware. And President Trump, he's considering accepting the nomination from the White House. The president's message, meanwhile, is getting pointed and personal as he tries to catch up to Biden in the polls and shore up his base.
He's going to do things that nobody ever would ever think even possible because he's following the radical left agenda. Take away your guns, destroy your Second Amendment, no religion, no anything, hurt the Bible, hurt God. He's against God. He's against guns.
Mr. Biden responded by calling Trump's attacks, quote, shameful, and said his own Catholic faith is a bedrock foundation of my life. Jonathan, I watched that and I wondered, why is he attacking Joe Biden on faith? Is it because the Republicans are worried about that evangelical support?
It's more that they're very frustrated that Biden is simply not as despised as Hillary Clinton was at this point in 2016. When the Trump campaign advisors look at the polling, one of the metrics they pay very close attention to is the very unfavorable number, the number that shows intensity of dislike towards the candidate. Hillary Clinton's was in the 40s, Biden's usually in the 20s. They're trying to drive up that number. They know that in many of these states, these battleground states, Donald Trump may not get to 50%. So in order to win, they need to make Biden unacceptable. They need to, for these voters who aren't choosing between Trump and Biden, they're choosing between Biden and maybe a third party. They need to make Biden unacceptable to those voters. So you're seeing them go all in on these attacks to basically, they don't think it's believable to make Joe Biden this evil, maniacal figure. They don't think that voters will buy that. What they do think voters will buy, and they're seeing some evidence in their private polling, is that Biden can be portrayed as this mentally incapacitated vessel to be filled with the greatest excesses of the far left. So that's what they're trying to do with Biden strategically.
Abby, what's your latest reporting on the VP search? Because to Jonathan's points, that pick will say a lot about how this campaign unfolds for the rest of the summer and fall.
Well, I do think that the pick is going to play a role in some of this, especially because some of the arguments that the Trump campaign is trying to use against Biden is designed to target Biden's support among African-American voters. They want to chip away as much as they can at that support, even if we're talking just a percentage point here or there, because they think that it could make the difference, and it did in 2016 in states like Michigan and elsewhere in this in the Midwest. So that's the objective. And Biden is now choosing between several women, many of whom are black women. And that list that you mentioned at the top, Bob, is also what I'm hearing. Three black women among the choices being considered. And one of my colleagues, Jeff Zeleny, this week reporting that Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan is also still in the running. So you're looking at three black women who could potentially help Biden shore up black supporters to some extent. Although I do think that particularly when we talk about Susan Rice, the choice there is less about issues of race and more about issues of ability to govern. And that is actually where Biden wants to be. He wants to make this a referendum on how President Trump is managing the federal government and its response to the pandemic.
Robert, can you jump in on that? You've done extensive reporting on Ambassador Rice and Vice President Biden's foreign policy. What would a Rice pick reveal about a Biden presidency?
Well, I think just as Abby said, that it would reveal a comfort level and a leaning into the notion of this is what governance would look like. But I actually want to argue the counter of this. I mean, the vice president has every right and should be factoring into who his running mate is, how personally comfortable he is with them, how well they will govern, and for that matter, who will excite the base. But you know, as we were referencing before with this portrayal that the Trump campaign is doing, I mean, making no bones about it, is basically brain-dead Manchurian candidate that Biden is a reminder that this is likely to be the most brutal presidential campaign in modern memory. memory, if not in all of American history. And I say this not as a statement of opinion, but as a statement of fact, that there's very little, if anything, that President Trump won't say or do to win.
Well,
I bring all
Robert,
this up. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Is Ambassador Rice ready for that political firestorm?
That's my point. That she, of course, has never been in a national campaign, a campaign of any sort. But for that matter, neither is Congresswoman Bass, who, for all of her other virtues, when she first ran for Congress in 2010, won with something like 80 or 81% of the vote. She's never really had a contested race. So there is a big question, even in this sort of virtual campaign season, of who's going to be able to take a punch in this very, very bruising campaign battle.
Lisa, you cover House Democrats. Where does Representative Bass stand with her friends and allies on Capitol Hill?
Well, I'll tell you, one of her biggest allies is a woman we've talked about before, Nancy Pelosi. You and I both know that Nancy Pelosi likes to ring in on major policy affecting Democrats. She sees herself as a national mind for them. And I don't have reporting that she is doing this, but it seems easy to believe that she is lobbying for Karen Bass. She is a strong ally. I'll also say over here on the Senate side, everybody reading the tea leaves. I mean, these senators really have had nothing to do all week because they've been waiting for these talks. So everyone's talking about the VP pick. And something I think worth bringing up with Kamala Harris is, of course, that she is someone who was friends with Beau Biden when they were both state attorneys general. NewsHour, Judy Woodruff asked Jill Biden this week what they're looking for in a VP pick. Everyone knows Jill and Joe Biden consult with each other. Jill Biden said the number one thing they're looking for is trust. After that, she said, I guess, experience and wisdom. But that idea of a former relationship of trust could be very important, whether it's Susan Rice, Kamala Harris, or not. But I think, as you've heard, he's thinking about these deeper issues. He's not thinking about which state he is going to win, it doesn't seem.
We're spending a lot of time doing this VP reporting, and there's only so much you can do sometimes because it's so fluid. Yeah. Jonathan, there's other big news today with foreign interference conclusions by national counterintelligence officials. Russia trying to interfere once again. China, perhaps, they say, interfering or thinking about interfering, leaning against President Trump. What's the White House's response?
I'm great question, which I'm trying to find out now. The Trump campaign put out a response saying we don't need, help, from anyone, et cetera, et cetera. The administration has been leaning in on China. They've made it very much a China focus, and they've tried to elevate China as the great threat, in multiple dimensions, but certainly in terms of election interference. They've tried to make sure that China is the first country that we think of when we think of election interference. But this is a finding that is inconvenient for Donald Trump. When I was with him, I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, and I asked him about Russia, he still, as soon as you use the word Russia, it doesn't even matter what the context is. The context I was asking about was the intelligence that Russia is paying bounties to the Taliban. He calls it a hoax. It's like a code word. As soon as he hears Russia, it's hoax, 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 and he puts it all together in the same basket with Mueller and Adam Schiff and collusion. So I can't imagine that he's particularly receptive to that intelligence, though I don't have reporting on how he's reacted specifically to it.
Robert, quickly, you have long reported on the national security apparatus. This isn't a hoax, it's serious stuff.
It is serious stuff, but notice that the statement put out by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I mean, they list first China, then Russia, then Iran, as if conflating them, saying that Russia favors Trump, but China and Iran favor Biden, so it's kind of a wash electorally, maybe even advantage Biden. And this is really not the proper way to be looking at it. It is well understood among intelligence officials that Russia enjoys primacy in terms of election meddling. China and Iran can't even come close, and for that matter, China is really doing an influence campaign, meaning they're paying state and local officials, they're throwing out propaganda, but they are not actually tampering with our infrastructure. They are really not able to affect the integrity of our electoral system the way Russia can, so they don't belong in the same breath.
Lisa, in 30 seconds, what's the reaction on Capitol Hill?
Right. Democrats do feel like that's a false equivalence. That's a problem. But one thing that's important here, Bob, is that there's real concern on Capitol Hill that this topic, a very serious topic of election security, is getting too political. So it was important that we saw the Republican and Democrat ranking members for the Senate Intelligence Committee to try and come out with a unified statement when things are very rocky on this issue behind closed doors.
And Abby, finally, how are Democrats, the Biden campaign, responding to this?
Well, of course, I think the Biden campaign has been asking for this kind of information for some time now. They've been very public about their concern that there is foreign election interference. And Joe Biden personally has said that this is the issue that keeps him up at night. So you can imagine that they're concerned about the parts of this that affect them. But I do think that you're also going to hear more from Democrats about what Lisa and Robert talked about, which is why this statement seemed to create an equivalence between what China is doing or not doing and what Russia is doing, particularly because the statement made it clear China has a preference for President Trump, but it didn't give any indication that they are acting on that in the same way that Russia is.